Developing in the nation's capital just hours from now, the January 6th committee is set to vote on contempt of Congress charges for two former aides to President Trump. The select committee says former senior trade advisor Peter Navarro and former deputy chief of staff Dan Scavino have illegally defied subpoenas. Scavino's attorney has declined comment. Navarro responded after last month's subpoena was issued with a lengthy statement indicating that he would not comply with the summons. If the committee approves the contempt measure, the full House will then vote on whether to make a formal referral to the Justice Department. Prosecutors in the U.S. Attorney's Office would then decide whether to file charges against the pair. And new this morning, January 6th committee is also weighing whether to question Ginny Thomas about a revealing set of text images between her and former President Trump's chief of staff, Mark Meadows. That's according to one member of the committee. Advocating for efforts to keep then-President Trump in office, even pushing congressional Republicans to be out on the streets, protesting the results of President Biden's legitimate victory. There are a growing number of Democrats raising red flags about whether these new revelations present a conflict of interest for Ginny Thomas's husband, who, of course, is Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas.
You have the wife of a sitting Supreme Court justice advocating for an insurrection, advocating for overturning a legal election to the sitting president's chief of staff. And she also knows this election, these cases are going to come before her husband. This is a textbook case for removing him, recusing him from these decisions. And I don't think, all I hear is silence from the Supreme Court right now, and that better change in the coming week.
Joining us now, Jake Sherman, co-founder of Punchbowl News. Glenn Kirshner is a former federal prosecutor. So, Jake, let's start with Peter Navarro and Dan Scavino. Why are these two former Trump aides so important to the 1-6 committee's investigation? What do they want to hear from them?
I mean, these are people, everybody that January 6th committee subpoenas, or most people, they believe has direct knowledge of what the president was doing, thinking, planning, plotting around January 6th, and the web of financial ties there within. So obviously, Scavino is somebody with close ties to the president, as is Peter Navarro. They had both spoken out publicly. I would say there's basically no doubt. I'll leave the legal element of this to Glenn, but there is basically no doubt that the January 6th committee is going to recommend the Justice Department charge him with contempt. That will happen today. There's a little bit of a question whether it will come to the floor of the House, but I'd even say that's most likely. So this seems to be an open and shut thing. And the basic way the January 6th committee views this is this is not an optional exercise. This is a committee that's vested with subpoena power, and you must listen to this committee, which is vested with subpoena power, when it speaks and issues subpoenas.
Having said that, Glenn, this will be the third and fourth person being held in contempt after Mark Meadows and Steve Bannon. But the DOJ has only pursued Bannon. Even that is stuck in legal limbo. So where's it all head?
Yeah, Chris, I'm with Jake. This is not an optional exercise, and subpoenas are not party invitations that can be declined. But whereas the facts are pretty clear, Scavino and Navarro have information and evidence directly relevant to Donald Trump and the White House's efforts to overturn the election's results. The legal end becomes a little murky because, we've seen criminal referrals for contempt of Congress before. The first one in this instance was Steve Bannon, and it took the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office 22 days to indict him. That was a bit of a delay, but still an indictment was handed down by the grand jury. Mark Meadows, by my count, I'm not great with math, I think we're on day 104 of the Mark Meadows indictment watch. What does that tell us? It tells us there is some sticking point at the Department of Justice with respect to asking the grand jury to indict Mark Meadows for the crime he inarguably committed, a crime for which he has no defense, contempt of Congress, because when you're subpoenaed, the Supreme Court has said you show up. Now, you can show up and on a question-by-question basis decline to answer questions asserting a privilege, but Meadows didn't do that, Navarro hasn't done it, and Scavino hasn't done it. So the challenge becomes Congress can refer these men for contempt all day long, but they're still at the whim of the Department of Justice regarding DOJ's determination to to indict these people.
Meantime, Jake, we're also getting new reaction from lawmakers about those texts from Ginny Thomas to Mark Meadows, which, of course, sparked controversy over whether Justice Thomas should recuse himself. Take a listen.
He's a jurist who has a lot of integrity, and I think he will make that decision. I don't think that what your spouse says should recuse you from, whether it's in the legislative branch or in the judicial branch.
I think that we also have a thorough investigation to better understand exactly what has happened with the judge's wife.
Is there anything Congress can do, or is that a separation of powers issue?
I think that we have a lot of problems with separation of power issues, and I have a lot of frustrations with the Supreme Court as a whole that they have not taken better measures to police themselves.
Well, one of the things we heard from Senator Cory Booker is that he wants a more thorough investigation into Ginny Thomas's actions. But what really might come of this?
Well, I would be shocked if they didn't subpoena her and at least ask her how involved she was in this effort. Was she involved in the planning of the rally, and what did she tell? I'm just projecting based on what I think they will do, having covered these people for a long time. They'll want to know whether she spoke to her husband about it. And I think, and by the way, what Cory Booker said here, that the Supreme Court does not police itself, is a frustration of members of Congress more broadly. They have very lax disclosure requirements. This is something that Congress has talked about clamping down on. I just can't imagine that they will just let this go by without any further investigation.
From your perspective, Glenn, does something need to happen? Because, yeah, Supreme Court justices famously don't abide by a set of ethics rules. It's basically self-policing.
Yeah, Chris, three things need to happen. The January 6th committee absolutely needs to subpoena Ginny Thomas and find out what her pressure campaign involved on the White House, trying to get the White House to overturn the results of a free and fair election, and what did she carry back to what she calls her best friend in her texts with Mark Meadows. She essentially says, I'm keeping him apprised. At the same time, Donald Trump is vowing to take the election challenge to the Supreme Court. That raises the next issue. This couldn't be a more direct actual conflict that Justice Thomas had. He absolutely should have recused himself, removed himself from having any role in deciding whether a challenge that was brought in court should be heard by the Supreme Court, a challenge involving whether his wife's texts, in part, should be disclosed to the J6 committee or hidden from the J6 committee. And I share Senator Booker's frustration. There really is no oversight mechanism, and there is a separation of powers issue. But the Supreme Court has proved it can't be trusted to police itself, so there has to be some remedy, and that is going to be something Congress has to tackle.
Glenn Kirshner, Jake Sherman, thanks to both of you. And still ahead, it's got to be one of the most Now to Washington, where President Biden is releasing his budget proposal for the upcoming year, and he will discuss it publicly this afternoon. It's a new chance for him to push his economic plans at a time when most Americans say he simply isn't doing anything that's working. There's a new NBC News poll that shows Biden's approval rating has fallen to its lowest level yet, getting negative marks on everything from the economy to foreign policy. NBC national political correspondent Steve Kornacki joins me now to break it down on the big board. Also with me, former North Dakota Democratic Senator Heidi Heitkamp. So, Steve, walk us through the new poll numbers.
Yeah, Chris, I mean, seems to be a direct link here we're seeing in these numbers between what you're talking about with the economy and Joe Biden standing in the polls and his party's standing in the polls in this midterm election year. Let's take you through it. Overall, right now, we find in this poll a 40% approval rating for Joe Biden, now well over 50% disapprove. Compare this to our last poll. This was taken just in January. Again, there's been a slide here over a period of time for Biden. It was 43. Now it's down to 40. So he's moved in the wrong direction in the last couple of months. Why is he moving in the wrong direction? Well, interestingly, it may not be because of this. We've been talking so much about COVID. In our new poll, Biden is back above 50% when it comes to approving of his handling of COVID. In our last poll, he had fallen underwater. So actually, you've seen cases go down a little bit. You've seen the masks start to come off. Biden's numbers on COVID have actually inched up here since our last poll. So what is driving it? Well, a couple things here. First of all, you've got the war in Russia and Ukraine. There's a lot of unity in the poll when you ask folks about their attitude towards Ukraine, their attitude towards Russia, their attitude towards Putin. But when it comes to Biden's handling of the situation, you can see here he's underwater. 41 approve, 52 disapprove. And then, as you mentioned, it is the economy. Look at this. Biden's handling of the economy now almost 2-to-1 disapprove in this poll, 33-63. Again, compare this to our previous poll in January. Back then, he was closer to 40%. Now he's closer to 30%. And long term, since the start of his presidency, 2021, this number, the approval of Joe Biden on the economy, has just ticked down and down and down. This is a new low for him on the economy, 33-63. You ask voters sort of an open-ended question here. What do you think the most important issue facing the country is? And there you can see the top two now: cost of living, jobs in the economy. Russia-Ukraine war obviously capturing everybody's attention right now, but it's the cost of living, it's jobs, the economy. Those are the two answers you get from Americans. And I thought this was interesting. When you pose the question this way, as we did in this poll to voters, you say, hey, both of these things are very important. Controlling inflation and improving the economy, ending the Russia-Ukraine war. Let's stipulate they're both important. Which, though, do you voters think should be Joe Biden's top priority? Again, you can see here it goes 68-29 when it comes to dealing with the economy. So we show how that is dragging down Joe Biden's approval rating. It also seems to be rubbing off on his party midterm election year. Here's the generic ballot. Republicans right now with a 2-point advantage in our poll, 46-44 over Democrats. Compare this to the last midterm election. Donald Trump was president. It was March 2018. You remember the 2018 midterms ended in a debacle for the Republicans. You could see it coming in that poll. Democrats led by 10 on the generic ballot back then. Now they trail by 2. That's how different of a political climate I think we're now in, Chris.
Steve, thank you for that. Senator, you know how this works. You don't get those kinds of numbers without Democrats jumping ship from Joe Biden. The Republican pollster Bill McInturff said this poll tells him, and I'm quoting, President Biden and Democrats are heading for a catastrophic election. Do you agree? And in any case, what can be done?
Well, I think that this is a story that has long been in the making. This isn't the first bad poll. This started 6-7 months ago. And I think the failure to take some mid-course corrections, you're seeing it now. On the Ukraine issue, that's the second side of the coin when you think about it. The war in Russia is going to drive up prices and increase inflation. And so they're connected in a way. The smartest thing Joe Biden has ever said is don't compare me to the almighty, compare me to the alternative. And so the Democrats' failure is not necessarily managing what they have right now in terms of these dual crises. Their failure is not defining what the Republican Party would do about them. And I think that when we move forward, they've got to focus exclusively on defining the Republican Party and what the Republican Party would do, or these are going to be catastrophic.
Yeah, but what people are often going to say is, but what the Democratic Party is doing isn't working. So you can compare it and you can say that's worse, but what you're doing isn't working.
Yeah, but what is the alternative? What is it that people want to have happen? We've got dramatic increases in energy costs, driven no small measure by what's happening with the war in Ukraine. And so when you look at it, billionaires in the oil industry today basically have seen their wealth grow 10%. So if I'm the Biden administration, I start talking about a windfall profits tax. I start talking about what it is that we're going to do to basically reduce those oil prices and make gas and energy affordable for Americans. But you also have to say the Republicans don't have a plan that's going to help you. Here's our plan. If I were Joe Biden right now, the thing that I would want is I would want the Senate to introduce a bill to make insulin prices $35, to cap it at $35. And guess what happens? The Republicans all vote against it. And you say they don't want to help average American families. You've got to define the alternative if you can't find a way to improve your favorabilities in the current conditions you have.
Former Senator Heidi Heitkamp, always good to see you. Steve Kornacki, thank you as well. And coming up, UNICEF, major question this morning remains how all of this may be impacted by President Biden's words, delivered Saturday at the tail end of a successful international trip in which he said off the cuff that President Putin can't remain in power. Secretary of State Antony Blinken trying to clarify those remarks Sunday.
I think the President, the White House, made the point last night that, quite simply, President Putin cannot be empowered to wage war or engage in aggression against Ukraine or anyone else. As you know, and as you've heard us say repeatedly, we do not have a strategy of regime change in Russia or anywhere else for that matter.
This morning, a spokesman for the Kremlin described President Biden's remarks as, quote, alarming. I want to bring in NBC's Molly Hunter, who's in Odessa, Ukraine. Carol Lee is covering the White House. Kori Schake is director of Foreign and Defense Policy Studies at the American Enterprise Institute. She served in the NSC and the State Department under President George W. Bush. And retired Army four-star General Barry McCaffrey, an MSNBC military analyst. Good to have all of you here. So, Kori, overnight, President Zelensky made these new overtures to the Russians. He's offering the possibility of a neutral status and security guarantees if Russia will offer what Zelensky calls peace without delay. Given where we are on the battlefield, do you think there's any possibility the Russians could take him up on it?
Yes, I think the Russian statement that their war objective is only about Donbass is a recognition that they're not succeeding militarily and looking for negotiated solutions. And I think President Zelensky's been incredibly smart to reinforce his message that Ukraine are the good guys in this fight by showing a willingness to be flexible on the negotiations.
Well, you know, General, obviously the best time to push a negotiation is when you have the stronger hand to play. Do you believe Ukraine has the stronger hand right now?
Yeah, I do. And I agree with Dr. Shaki's remarks. But we shouldn't kid ourselves. Putin himself makes the decisions. And I don't think he's changed his strategy. He's faced a tactical defeat with his combat forces. And so I think his generals are saying we better defeat the Ukrainian army in the east and seize Odessa, I think, as our short-term principal goals. But any weakness on the Ukrainian part, and I think Putin will continue to try and seize the entire country and reintegrate it back into Mother Russia. I think that was his goal going in, and it still remains his goal.
So, Molly, if it's about seizing Odessa, tell us what's going on the ground there right now.
Chris, so we can barely show you anything in the city. It's a city of 1 million people. About half the population has left the city. The other half have enlisted. They are engaged in supporting the city. So actually, we're at a volunteer center right now. They're just loading up water right now. I just want to show you, we can't show you the sandbags. We can't show you the military checkpoints. We can't show you how this city of 1 million on the Black Sea is hunkering down. They are ready, Chris. But I do just want to take you inside. I'm just going to show you what everyone here is doing. So just walk with me for a second and forgive if anything, our signal breaks up at all. This was a food court, Chris. And inside now, we've asked who actually is working here. It is all these young people who used to spend time at the food court. Now just come in. They are so well organized. They have medical supplies. They have food. They have basic supplies for anyone who's staying and hunkering down. And anything that people here don't need, they're sending out east. So just take a look at how many people. They are categorizing the information. When they get supplies, they're then sending it out east. They're even responding specifically to requests from the military. Now, we spoke with the head organizer of this logistics center. I just want you to take a listen.
There was a lot of discussion 4 weeks ago that Odessa was going to be next. Odessa was going to get hit very hard. Odessa was going to be under attack.
I believe that it can be even in 1 hour.
Yeah.
But we will be here and we will proceed with our support. Anyway, we must do it.
Now, Chris, we've also been speaking with the Navy here. We've asked them, are they ready? Are they preparing for anything? They say Russia is out of options. They say they are going to fight on land. They do not anticipate anything coming from the sea at this moment. But I do actually just, Chris, want to just give you a sense. Up there was a bar where all of those young people are working on their laptops right now. There's a sign that says oysters and champagne. There's a sign that says Aperol spritzes. We've been talking to people here, and they say they cannot wait until this center gets to return, hopefully as early as December summer to what it was. Chris?
Well, General, obviously, that's been a key part of the Ukrainian strength. They love their country. They want their country. They want to return their country to what it was. Now, we all know the physical, not to mention the loss of life and the emotional devastation we've seen. But I wonder, as you're looking at this and listening to what we just heard, is Vladimir Putin out of options, truly out of options? Or is that a mistake to think that because of some of the changes we've seen on a battlefield, and then picking up on what you were saying earlier, that he doesn't have a whole load of options, all of them really bad for the world and for Ukraine?
Yeah, well, look, I think tactically he's been fought to a standstill by these extremely courageous Ukrainians with massive support, not by NATO specifically, by individual countries, the Brits, the French, the U.S., 20,000 smart munitions. They've done an incredible job. Now, poor Mr. Putin is scrambling to find bodies to replace his casualties in the combat units. We save 15% casualties. At rifle company or tank company level, it's much more severe. So the guy is in trouble, but his short-term fallback, as we've seen, is to become an artillery force, cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, and to pound the urban areas into submission, trying to force capitulation. So the war isn't over yet. It's still grim. And I hope the U.S. and our allies can provide some game-changing technology, anti-ship missiles, better air defense capability, and continued supply of Javelin, Stinger, and other smart munitions.
And what became the big conversation over the weekend, Carol, was not about the Ukrainians. It was about what President Biden said, right? He has this smooth, disciplined trip. He gives a forceful speech, and then with just a few words at the end of it, it blows everything up. In the view of a lot of people, President Macron put it this way: we shouldn't escalate with words or actions. That's exactly what the White House's sort of strategy, their belief, has been all along. Internally, what are you hearing from folks at the White House? Do they think that this could complicate the situation, complicate the efforts that obviously Zelensky wants to make right now to come to some sort of negotiated end to this for peace?
Sure, Chris, and that's part of the concern that some administration officials have about the president's comments, and that's why you saw the White House come out so quickly to try to walk them back. And the concern is that anything that sounds like the U.S. is seeking regime change in Russia could, as you said, complicate peace talk efforts, but also potentially provoke further aggression from Vladimir Putin and feed the narrative that Putin has in Russia that the West is just out to topple the Russian government. The president's comments are complicated by the fact that if you're a person just looking at what he says, it would be logical to say, of course, he doesn't think Vladimir Putin should remain in power. He has called him a butcher. He said he's committed war crimes. But the U.S. is, from their position, the administration's official position is that anything that sounds like regime change is unhelpful, and that they wanted to be very clear that the U.S. policy is not officially regime change in Russia. So that's where they're drawing this distinction here. And look, this is a speech that was supposed to be the capstone of what the White House saw as a very successful trip overseas, and that was hastily put together. They felt the president had rallied the U.S. allies, met with refugees, and then was giving this very stirring, impassioned speech. And now all of that is overshadowed by that last ad-lib line saying that Vladimir Putin should not remain in power, Chris.
And Corey, a lot of people asking, could this provoke Putin? I mean, there's another argument to be made. Putin doesn't need to be provoked. He just seems to do what he wants to do in any moment. And then it also may just shine a light on the fact that what President Biden said is frankly what a lot of people around the world are already thinking, right? They just want Vladimir Putin gone, and maybe that's a recognition on his part. I wonder just how you think, with your knowledge of Vladimir Putin, how it's playing really.
Well, I certainly think Vladimir Putin doesn't need to be provoked. He's already lashing out and dangerous. But the president's sloppy lack of discipline will make it harder for Russia to capitulate, right? And so I think the president ought to have just stuck with a speech about Allied unity rather than closing on a line that allies actually don't agree on, and that will make it harder for Ukraine to achieve its objectives of pushing Russia out and restoring peace to Ukraine. So I wish he hadn't said it. It was unhelpful, but I don't think it's a major ordeal. And I do think what our focus should be is on strengthening the Ukrainians to fight and encouraging the Russians to stop fighting.
Yeah, I saw you nodding when the general was talking about more things that the United States and NATO could be doing in terms of providing weaponry and so on to Ukraine. Thank you, General Barry McCaffrey, Kori Schake, Carol Lee, and of course, Molly Hunter, who is in